Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, how to practice self-compassion. Are you kind and loving towards yourself? Do you offer the same care to yourself as you give it to others? How do you talk to yourself when you make a mistake or go through hard times? Do you get caught up in negative self-talk, self-criticism? In today's conversation, we will demystify the notion of self-compassion for you and cover its practical application. I am speaking with a young, bright, and deeply insightful woman who loves nature as much as I do. Marissa Knox, Ph.D., is a teacher, researcher, and writer, currently offering undergraduate and graduate courses at the University of Texas at Austin. In her teaching and research, Marissa focuses on self-compassion, mindfulness, gratitude, and connection to nature as integral resources for emotional resilience and multi-dimensional well-being across the lifespan. As a mindful self-compassion teacher, Marissa helps people embody their values and transform their relationships to self, work, and others. Marissa collaborates with companies and community organizations to create practical and relevant strategies for reducing stress and burnout and improving coping. She has facilitated self-compassion programming for healthcare professionals, educators, students, therapists, parents, and enjoys supporting groups and individuals in applying these skills to their unique contexts. She is also the author of Grace and Possibility, a book of poetry, contemplations, and self-reflective writing practices. Marissa happens to be the daughter of one of my favorite listeners, Roberta Knox, who is a therapist in California and has become a friend. I am so grateful for our connection. During my recent trip to California, I was this close to meeting her, but alas, it didn't work out. I think next time. Roberta is a loyal fan. She supports my work, and she's generously contributing as a patron on patreon.com. If you want to hear her feedback about the podcast that she sent in for episode 300, I will link it in the show notes. I am positive you're going to enjoy today's episode. Marissa and I talked about the value of feeling all of our feelings and shared how we individually cope with difficult and unpleasant emotions. She talked about grace, a practice of remembering, nourishing, and resting in what is most important. Grace is an acronym, and it stands for G, grounding in gratefulness. R, remembering to rest in the rainbow. A, attending to what is already and always. C, centering in connection. And E, exhaling and embodying. I truly enjoyed my time with Marissa. It turned out we had a lot of things in common, and I hope you will find benefit in it too. Please enjoy this intimate conversation with Marissa Knox. First of all, welcome to the podcast. Second of all, I want to say that your mom is one of my biggest fans, which is really lovely. And I am going to meet her in person very soon, which is also exciting. I have met a lot of my listeners through my live event. Some people live in my state. I have met like that, but it's always exciting to meet new people. when you do the podcast, it's very abstract, right? You don't see the listeners, but when you meet them in real life, it's a little nerve-wracking. It's like there is real people, they're real. So shout out to your mom, who is become a friend, and she's always very supportive. She's a supporter on Patreon, a generous supporter of my work, and she always sends me messages, and it's very warm. I have this lovely connection, and every time I do the podcast, I think of her, or when there are topics that remind me of her, I think of her, that this is Roberta is going to like this. It's very powerful how this podcast can make connections happen. So that was my long way of saying, nice to meet you and welcome to the podcast.
I'm so honored to be here. I'm so honored that my mom brought me up to you and that you followed up and are actually wanting to speak with me. I'm so humbled by this. You have spoken to so many incredible minds that have really influenced my work. So it's such a privilege to be here. And I love that you and my mom get to have a relationship. I think you're both really lucky to know each other. So it's really beautiful to see that friendship blossom.
Yeah, I am very excited about that. So you research and teach about self-compassion, mindfulness, and you've written a little book called Grace and Possibility, a practice for remembering, nourishing, and resting in what is most important. It's beautiful writing, beautiful poetry, and this beautiful practice of grace. How did you become interested in self-compassion, first of all? You are a young woman. I think it's very fashionable now, all those things, right? Mindfulness, compassion. But what was it that drew you to this work particularly?
Yeah, well, it comes back to my mom, actually. One of the main words of wisdom she would give me when I was struggling with my friendships growing up was to be my own best friend. She said, you got to really be your own best friend, look out for yourself, be there for yourself. And I never understood that because I thought that's what good friends are for. Why should I have to do that for myself? It was very confusing, but it's the best gift of wisdom that I could have received. And when I was in college, I had a real falling out with a roommate that was really difficult for me. It was one of the lowest points in my life. And I was seeing a therapist who recommended Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection. And I remember thinking, how can there be anything good about imperfection? I was just so deeply entwined with perfectionism and being really self-critical. And in that book, Kristin Neff's work was referenced on self-compassion and this concept of being kind to yourself like you would a good friend. And it just kind of spiraled upwards from there, where I got to pursue a degree and study alongside Kristin Neff in graduate school. So I'm so grateful to my mom for planting the seed and for just the honor of getting to learn from Kristin and really learn from my own life. I certainly study what I need to know because this is something I really struggle with. So that's kind of where it all started.
Yeah, it's so interesting how you said that your mom gave you that piece of advice, even though in that moment it didn't make sense or you didn't understand what it meant. But we have so much impact, right? As parents, like one sentence, one piece of advice can mean so much. And I'm always aware of this when I'm parenting my daughter. I'm like, what is she going to remember about me or what I said to her? And that makes me very aware of how I communicate or what I say about failure, about friendships, when she's going through tough times, or about winning or losing when it comes to sports. I'm always reminded of this because I think it's very powerful. I have had mentors in my life too, people who have said things, even just one sentence that completely changes your entire life, right? Yeah. I had a history teacher, not to digress from our self-compassion topic, but I had a history teacher in high school, and I never took music lessons, but I was always interested in piano, and I'm very musically gifted. And there was a piano in our school, and I would stay and play and try to, learn on my own. And once I heard this teacher say to another teacher, when I see this girl at the piano, it feels as if this instrument was created for her. And when I heard that, I said, that's it. This is the confirmation I needed. And that gave me wings. And I started composing and playing, and I can play just about anything now by ear. And that was this big gift that this person, unwittingly, he just made a comment. But for a young child, I think particularly for a teenager, we experience as teenagers the world so intensely and more vividly, and it's a whole different level. I mean, the pain is more painful, right? The failing of the friendship is a lot worse than you think it is. And so meaningful things have really powerful impact like that.
Yeah, that's incredible. I would love to hear you play. One of my goals is to learn how to play piano, because that's not something I was taught when I was younger. And it's such a beautiful instrument.
It is. It is. So, do you have a regular self-compassion practice for yourself now that you have studied a lot and did research and taught? I'm curious, what do you practice? What it's like for you?
Yeah, my whole life is an experiment of self-compassion. It's something that I have to reflect on every day, not just because I'm teaching it to my students, but because it's something that's such a core part of my mental health and my relationships and my ability to thrive and be the best version of myself I can. So it happens mostly in informal ways of just the way that I'm relating to my emotions, how I'm taking care of my body, how I am connecting to things that matter to me. So I practice it. And the grace practice really is a reflection of self-compassion for me, because I think one of the kindest things we can do for ourselves is remember what's most important to us and connect to that each day, even in small, tiny ways, just as a sign of care for our deepest heartfelt meaning in life.
Yeah. Well, so then let's start with grace. Why don't you tell me what grace stands for, and we'll go over each letter of the acronym.
So I'm a little bit of a word nerd, and I love alliteration. So every letter gets to have a fun alliterated title. So the G is about grounding in the grace of gratefulness. So it's just a deep gratitude practice. The R is about remembering to rest in the rainbow, a practice of honoring impermanence and change. The A is about attending to what is already and always. So really connecting to what can't be taken away, even through the hardships of life, just touching base with that inherent quality of wholeness and worthiness. And the C is about centering in connection, both centering in our own connection to what matters to us, as well as our interconnectedness with other people in the world. And E is about exhaling and embodying, and really just letting go and trusting that our presence is enough, and just being who we are moment by moment is enough.
Let's talk about the G, grounding and gratitude. When you say all the letters, do you mean we practice this is this a fluid process that we do step by step, or this is more of a philosophy and you can ground yourself in any of the letters at any given time?
Yeah, it really just evolved from the pandemic and needing to have some anchor point, a touchstone for me to come back to in the midst of all the uncertainty and all of the loss of that time. And so these 5 contemplations are really, for me, a distillation of the years of study and teaching I've done, both in self-compassion and spiritually through Buddhism and yoga and religious studies and just astrology and tarot and all of the things. And so they don't have to be done in any particular order. You don't have to do all of them at once. You can just contemplate on the G for a day or a week or a month. I just wanted to give a little constellation of practices that people can return to find what works for them, and to really give people permission to be creative with it. This is just what works for me, but everyone part of self-compassion is figuring out what works best for you.
What's the latest in compassion or self-compassion research?
Oh, yeah, there's so much. It's almost hard to keep up because people are publishing really compelling studies all the time. One of the studies that really excites me is about the power of a supportive gesture, your hand on your heart in particular, but it could be a gentle hug, holding your hands on your lap, holding your face, and just really connecting to yourself through a physical gesture. Some folks did a study on that and compared it to hugging someone and we're looking to see if that could reduce people's cortisol in the face of a stressful situation. And what they found is that just a few moments of putting your hand on your heart and taking a deep breath was just as effective as getting a hug from somebody in the face of stress and reduces your cortisol. So I think that's really powerful. And it's neat to see the science support this practice. It's so important because self-compassion really includes being kind to ourselves. And that can look so many different ways. One of those ways could be the simplicity of a loving gesture of your hand on your heart. And now we know physiologically there's evidence for the benefit of that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's good to know because I do teach that kind of stuff in my classes. The calm formula, you start with putting your hand on your heart, even the Authentic Parenting Manifesto. I have it up here. It says, when the hard time comes, and they always do, I put my hand on my heart and breathe, which now it's great that the science supports it. Mm-hmm. I also love the idea of the self-hug or self-touching your arms as if you are tightly hugging yourself. It makes you feel safe, contained, right? And hence, I guess it drops the cortisol level, which is nice. That's nice. So when you teach self-compassion to people, where do you start? Because I think people have misconceptions about self-compassion. They think it just sounds great. And people on Instagram, especially, oh, be so self-compassionate, guys. But what does that really mean, self-compassionate, right? I want you to tell us what it means and practically, how can a person practice self-compassion, especially when they have self-critical thoughts? I think it's very helpful to turn the self-critical thoughts, the inner critic, into self-compassion. I find that very powerful, right?
Oh, yeah, that's one of the most important ways that self-compassion can support us. And you're right that there's a lot of be kind to yourself messages, which is wonderful. I love seeing that around. But what does that actually mean? What does that look like in practical terms is often not explored. So that's what I try to do when I teach, is really make it concrete, practical, something people can do in the moment. It doesn't have to be a really formal practice. And self-compassion, the way I learned it from Kristen Neff, her 3 components, I think, are really helpful for making this abstract concept more grounded in things that we can tap into. So mindfulness is the first piece of that. And that's really paying attention to our experience without judging it as good or bad or right or wrong, but simply what is, so that we know what we might need and what we can give ourselves to feel supported. And there's a quote from a Zen teacher, John Tarrant, who says, "Attention is the most basic form of love, and through it we bless and are blessed." And I think that's such a beautiful and poetic way to express what mindfulness is. It's paying attention to our lives and to ourselves out of love. And common humanity is the second main component of self-compassion. And this is kind of where the magic happens, because so much of what creates and exacerbates our suffering is feeling isolated or alone, like something's wrong with us for having a big emotion or a hard time. And common humanity reminds us that feeling difficult emotions, going through hardships, is a part of the human experience. There's nothing wrong with us for our struggles and our stress. And in fact, what is difficult connects us to others. That's what keeps us connected in our human condition. It's not what separates us. And even when the exact details of what we're going through differ from person to person, right? The underlying quality of that is a shared human vulnerability and tenderness. And then self-kindness is the simplest, but not the easiest part of it. And that's where I really invite people to get creative to figure out what that looks like. Sometimes it's changing your self-talk, like what you were saying when you notice a critical thought, offering something more kind and supportive and understanding. But I think we can find self-kindness through the actions we take on a day-to-day basis. And many people are kind to themselves without realizing it. Even just going to the grocery store and making sure you have everything on your list, making sure you have enough toilet paper, those types of things that we take for granted are all little acts of kindness that we do for ourselves. But for others, the words of speaking kindly and saying, "Oh, sweetheart, you're having a hard time. Like, let's drink some water and get outside in nature." Maybe talking to ourselves isn't going to resonate for someone else. And maybe for them, it's just about putting their hand on their heart and taking a deep breath. And for somebody else, it's listening to some music. So it really is as personal as anyone wants it to be.
Yeah, I so resonate with that. Thank you for clarifying that and mentioning that small acts of kindness towards yourself, as small as getting a glass of water, not depriving yourself of nourishment, of food, especially for moms, right? Parents, you can get busy with work and child rearing and activities and forget to even eat or shower. Having a little commitment to yourself every day, a promise that I'm going to care for myself, for my body, for my soul. And everybody can decide for themselves what is it that they long for, what is it that they need, so that they can give that kindness to themselves, right? A person who is eating well and doesn't have issues, or drinking and showering, that may not resonate with them. Maybe exercising or taking a walk, doing something small for yourself, I feel like is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And you're right, it looks different for every person. I'm just trying to think what works for me. I don't have that harsh inner critic that says, "Oh, you're a failure, you're a piece of this, Anna." I never had that harsh inner critic. And so I don't even talk to myself in a kind way. I don't say, "Oh, sweetheart, that sounds weird for me too." But I do things for myself. I can take myself for a walk, or I can just go to town and enjoy a walk by myself and not worry about the dishes or things of this nature if I have a little break. I think acts of kindness for myself is one big one for me. What works for you?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're saying all of this. And I think, I work with healthcare professionals and teachers and people who are giving to others, parents as well. And I like to remind people that self-compassion is an act of generosity, right? It's one of the most generous things because it makes everything else possible, to give love to others, to care for others, give our time and energy. So it really is an essential nutrient for our spirits. And for me, nature is one of the main things. Being able to be with the beauty of nature, the present to the miracle of nature, and just really witness the sacredness of life that easily gets covered up by emails and demands and all kinds of things that feel urgent and stressful. It slows me down into presence. And it doesn't have to be much. I would love to go on a week-long backpacking trip with my dad every month if I could. But even just looking out my window right now, there's a cherry blossom tree, and just connecting to that in this moment is nourishing me. So it can be really simple in that way.
But again, I think you have to tune into that, right? You have to not only just glance at that nice blossom out the window, you have to take it in just a little bit so that it sinks in and gives you a sense of awe, wonder, and joy. Mm-hmm. And that requires presence.
Yes.
That requires mindfulness, because if you're busy, wrapped up in doing things, you're not going to even register those small things.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, that's such an easy point to miss, because the central question of self-compassion is often said, what do I need right now? okay. Sometimes we don't always know what we need, but maybe we do. And we say, okay, I need a really nourishing meal, right? So we decide, I'm going to have a really nourishing meal. I'm going to figure that out for dinner tonight. And then we get caught up in doing it and going through the act of it. And we don't often pause to receive that gift and to really honor what goes into giving ourselves what we need. And so, as you're saying, we really have to both be active recipients of our own care in order for it to be nourishing and to be supportive. Because so often we're going through the motions of self care, we're doing it because we think we should. And it just becomes another thing that we check off on our to-do list, and it kind of loses its value. So presence is really that essential underlying capacity that makes all of this possible.
Yeah, I posted something today on Instagram and people are liking it. So this is relevant as we speak about this. I wrote, when we take care of our children while neglecting ourselves, we unwittingly normalize self-abandonment. And it seems like people are liking and sharing yes and giving me comments and things like that. It's true, right? We don't want to abandon ourselves and be this hectic, crazy person who is taking care of everyone else. Then that is not normal. I mean, we feel empty. In our well-being is a big predictor for our children's well-being. So it's important to care for ourselves, be kind and compassionate. And like you said, ask that central question, what do I need right now? And that, again, requires slowing down, pausing, and treating yourself with that kindness. I think that's the first kind step, to pause and say, what do I need right now? Even considering yourself that you need something now, right? That's in and of itself is self-compassionate.
Yeah, just slowing down enough to ask yourself that question, right? If you are checking in with a friend, and if you're like, hey, how are you? But you don't actually care about the answer, that's not the grounds for a really great relationship. But we're not really giving ourselves the time of day to check in and listen and be like, hey, how am I really? Like, what does it feel like to be me? What's going on within me? So you're exactly right. It does require that relationship with ourselves. And one of the things I've been exploring, I want to give so much to my students and my family and my relationships. And I realized that my presence is my best creation. Like, my presence is the best gift I can offer others. And so considering what are the things that cultivate my ability to be available, emotionally available to the people I'm connecting with, to be present, to listen, to be generous with my energy. And those things, the answer to that is stuff that's really hard to implement. It's boundaries, it's saying no, it's quitting things, it's holding ourselves to that integrity, which is hard to do. It's nice to talk about values and integrity and doing things that allow us to align with what fulfills us, but actually making those choices to care for that is hard. And I think that also gets looked over when people say, be kind to yourself. Well, sometimes the kindest thing is kind of uncomfortable and hard to do and might disappoint people. And that's kind of icky if people don't want to talk about that part of self-compassion so much.
Yeah, you're so right. But you have to, again, but why do people have a hard time with self-compassion? What are the people? Do they feel undeserving of the same kindness? Are they too busy to be gentle and kind towards themselves? Do they think this is just airy-fairy thing? What goes in the mind of a person who is struggling with this?
Yeah, that's a huge question. There are so many reasons, and you named some of them. And I think, it's uncomfortable. Self-compassion requires us to feel what hurts, to feel our emotional pain or physical pain, and to honor our vulnerability and humanity. And that requires the willingness and the courage and bravery to feel some tenderness. And so I think a lot of people avoid this practice because of that requirement to feel what we feel. And experience the full spectrum of human emotions and human experience, which a lot of it is uncomfortable. And I think another part is, I've learned a lot from both Brene Brown and Kristen Neff, and this idea of hustling for our worthiness and thinking that we got to stay busy and stay productive and achieve things, please other people, perform and be perfect. And all of those things are distractions from what's underneath, which is that relationship with ourselves and confronting our lives and why we're doing what we're doing. So I think we just kind of get caught up in that go, go, go. I have to do all these things in order to feel worthy. And instead of realizing I already am worthy, and because I'm worthy, then what? Now how can I relate to my commitments and relationships? And then self-criticism is such a big one because perfectionism is really part of the culture, especially in the United States, but all over the world. Again, that people who are excellent, and that often gets conflated with perfection, are the best. And that's what we should constantly strive for. And that doesn't leave a lot of room for humanness. And so that's another huge obstacle. And I struggle with perfectionism myself, even knowing how harmful it is to myself and others. It's so deeply ingrained in there. And that's definitely one of the biggest obstacles for me.
I have to say, I don't struggle with perfectionism because this podcast has helped me to overcome that. So you are smiling, but it's true because I can't control the outcome. I can't create the best or perfect interview. I'm going to stumble. I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm okay with that now. I have an accent. I make a lot of mistakes in my English or when I record an intro, but it made me realize it's the bigger picture that matters. No one cares about the small details. It's always in my head. I did an interview recently with someone, and while I was conducting this interview, I was feeling so self-judgmental that I'm not doing a good job. This is not where I want to go. Oh my gosh, this is failing. I'm not going to publish this episode. This is terrible. Oh my gosh, why did you ask that question? That was stupid, Anna. Was my thinking, right, the whole time. But I'm continuing the podcast, and when it came back from the editors, and I was listening to it before I put out for people to listen to, I'm like, wow. You can't even tell what was going on in my mind through my voice. It looks amazing. It sounds great. It sounds just like regular Anna's episodes. But what was going on in my mind that day was a completely different story. And so this podcast has helped me realize that there is no perfection. I don't even like using that term perfect for anything. I invite parents to even never say, I'm not a perfect parent, or I'm not perfect. I'm not a perfect human. Like, why are we even using this term? Because there is no perfection, right? There is no perfect human. There is no perfect parent. There's no perfect anything in life. But yet somehow it's in our lexicon. I think the first step is just to eliminate that kind of language and never even use it. When I send out newsletter to my mailing list, I bet there is a ton of mistakes in them. You know what? I'm okay with that. I'm not saying I don't have standards. Don't get me wrong, but I am very okay with imperfections now. And maybe I'm getting closer to 50. Age has to do something with that too. But the podcast, I truly, half jokingly, half seriously, has helped me with that. Because it is a grand gesture that I have to put myself out there every week. If I was a perfectionist, I would never release an episode. Yeah. I would just sit on it and make it perfect and wallow in it and worry about it. But I'm okay with that.
Yeah, perfectionism is really immobilizing. And I'm so inspired to hear how you've embraced imperfection as a gift. It's relatable, it's human, it's authentic, like the name of the podcast. And so to me, because I don't see us stopping the use of that word, I'm a big fan of just redefining words for myself. And so I've been trying to redefine perfect as is life as it is, not as we think it should be. Like this is perfect because it's complete with everything we need to grow, to love, to connect, to heal. That's another way that I've been trying to work with that word because it is so prevalent. But yeah, it is. And what's important, what's a gift to our children, to our family, to our friends and colleagues is our presence, not our perfection. That's what it's about. And that's counterintuitive sometimes. It seems too simple, but it really is. What's most important is just our presence.
Hey, do you love the podcast? Show your support by becoming a patron on patreon.com and join our 15 existing members who believe and support the work of authentic parenting. Patreon is a place where creators, artists, and podcasters get support from their fans. Your contribution makes a difference. When you become a patron at any level, I'll send you a handwritten thank you card with some awesome authentic parenting merch. A tote bag, a pen, a t-shirt, a mug. You'll be part of the special insiders circle and get other benefits as well. Discounts on my services and offerings, extra content, and of course, exclusive access to me. You can stop your contribution at any time. A lot goes into the production of the podcast, and I truly need your help. Head over to patreon.com/authentic parenting. The link is in your show notes as well. And join other big-hearted and generous listeners from around the world. It's not the amount that matters, it's the fact that you give that matters. After all, I created this podcast and built our community on the notion of giving. We have different levels of support starting from $2 a month. If you break it down, it comes down to 50 cents per episode. $2 can't even get you a cup of hot drink in a major US city. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being part of our global, diverse, and strong community. Your support truly matters. Simply visit patreon.com/authentic parenting and choose a level of support today. Again, visit patreon.com/authentic parenting and choose a level of support. Now, back to the show. What could you suggest or kind of practice for overcoming perfection, like an antidote to perfectionism? Is there something like that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways we can meet the emotion that arises when we're starting to feel perfectionistic, whether it's intervening with our self-talk if we're really self-critical, or just if we notice a judgment or an anxiety about something not being quite how we want. We can be inspired by the tradition of wabi-sabi and of kintsugi, a Japanese way of relating to so-called imperfections as a sacred resemblance of the impermanence and preciousness of life. And so we can see everything as imperfect as what makes it special, what makes it a gift, what makes it perfect in a different way is kind of how I've tried to look at it. And also to remember, again, with our self-critical talk, a lot of times our inner critic is trying to help us out, not always, but sometimes it really is trying to help us be better, to improve, to find some control of the situation. And so we can have a conversation with our inner critic and try to see what it needs and just remind it that we're enough as we are and it's okay. There's not a real threat here, right? It's often feels really anxiety inducing and threat, like there's a threat to our self-concept or to our lives, even when we notice something wasn't perfect. But it depends what it is that we're being judgmental about, if there is safety involved. But just having that conversation with that different part of ourselves can open up a different perspective too.
Yeah, I find that when a person is experiencing elevated levels of stress or overwhelm, that's when the self-critic activates, right? More so than in more relaxed or when you're feeling safe and regulated times. And so to recognize when your inner critic activates and it's a little louder than usual, that should be a sign to say, you know what, I think I'm overwhelmed. Maybe I should be self-compassionate and care for myself and do something for myself to lessen my stress load or not worry about my to-do list or whatever the person can do for themselves. I think that should be that indication. Or same is for perfectionism, really. In what areas does perfectionism show up for you? Is it like in your work? Is it writing, teaching, or I'm curious.
Yeah, I think it shows up the things that I care about most. So, I really want to teach well and make sure I support my students and offer them the most valuable learning experience. So, I've been hard on myself when I miss an opportunity to give a good example or something like that. But I find that the more human and imperfect I am with my students, the more relatable I can be. And that's actually gives them a different lesson and is also important too. And I had to record myself doing an intervention on a podcast. And I was really perfectionistic there. I wanted to explain things as well as possible. And so I can get perfectionistic about wanting to just use all the best examples and words. I'm noticing it now, wanting to make sure I can give your listeners the most useful and practical tips I can. But in this short amount of time, I won't be able to, and that's okay.
And so you're sensing now that your perfectionistic part of yourself is getting louder as we talk.
It's here, but I see it as just a sign that I really care, and I just really value this experience of being with you. So instead of judging myself, I'm just like, oh, that makes sense. I just really care about this opportunity, and that's why that's here.
Wow, that's a very good distinction. I think that's very powerful what you just shared, right? Not being, you're sort of befriending it or sort of listening to it. You're not overwhelmed by it. You note, right? You're aware of it, but you use it for your own not benefit, for the sake of this presentation or this conversation to guide you to be more mindful or better, or and you're not, it's not overpowering you.
Yeah, it's a
you're
part of
seeing
me.
is as a guidance.
Yeah, yeah. It's all part of our wholeness. We're so multifaceted, so complex. We hold so many contradictions. And part of my self-compassion practice is trying to include all these parts of myself, the ones that are more difficult to like, when I get critical or impatient or irritable, as well as the ones that are perfectionistic. It's just like, you're all welcome to be here. You're all doing the best you can to help me show up in my full self, and it's okay that you're here. And so I think that's one of the most loving things we can do is allow ourselves to be multifaceted and know that not any single thought or emotion or action defines who we are. We're so much bigger than that in our wholeness.
Yeah, so true. Reminds me of Dr. Dick Schwartz's method, right? No
Yes.
bad parts. I interviewed him. It's really powerful to think like that about ourselves and not to be defined by one part. Oftentimes people say that I'm a perfectionist, I am an anxious person, I am an alcoholic, I am such and such. And I think recognizing that these are just parts of ourselves and not the whole of us, right? It's really liberating, and it's a good feeling. Then we can accept ourselves. We can start to love and accept the other parts that are easy to love, and the hard parts, maybe we can be gentler, slowly, and eventually maybe we can be gentle to all parts, right?
Yeah. And one of the reflections of remembering to rest in the rainbow that is really important to me is to honor this ever-changing quality of life. Like everything is changing in flux, it's impermanent, including ourselves. And I think self-criticism and perfectionism tries to solidify us into something that's fixed and rigid. And it's compassionate to remember our fluid, changing nature and that we're full of possibility in any moment. There's so much possibility for growth and change and creativity and learning and connection. And that's such an important thing for me to come back to is okay, like there's still possibility, even with the limitations of this moment and how I feel. I can tap back into that spaciousness and possibility of change.
When you said those words, I felt like an opening inside me, spaciousness. When I heard you describe this impermanence, it's so true. Like we are speaking now, but we started a while ago and it's already in the past, right? I like that about life. I don't find that depressing. I think the impermanence is a good reminder to treasure the good moments
Mm-hmm.
and also to know in hard times that's also going to be temporary,
Yeah. And
right?
impermanence is like this gift of grace that shows us what's most important because things are shifting and changing, and we don't know which moment with someone might be our last. There is such a tenderness to that, and understandably so. And there's such a beauty to that. Cherry blossoms, which again are out my window, they come and go so quickly, and they're this exquisite gift. And that's our lives, this beautiful miracle that's here for just a moment. There's so much mystery while we're here. And remembering that is such a good like refresh button in my mind when I start to get caught up and stuck on all these things. Connecting to that through nature and through the impermanence of a breath can really help me be kinder to myself.
Yeah, very powerful. I had a headache for 2 days in a row. And what saved me was this is going to pass. Tomorrow I'm going to get up and it's all going to be gone and I'm going to be feeling amazing. I'm not going to feel this pain. And so I don't take any medications or anything. And I don't even suffer. I mean, I deal with it just as it is, this headache. I mean, it incapacitated me for those 2 days. I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do, but I knew it was impermanent. And I was saying that to myself, reminding over and over that this headache is not going to be there in a day. I'm going to get up and I'm going to enjoy my day. And sure enough, when the headache was not there, or any physical pain for that matter, I woke up the next day, I'm like, wow, you don't even remember that painful headache days anymore. It's like a whole new day, a whole new you. And I love that about human experience. But to have reminders, I think is valuable.
Yeah, that's the hardest part is in that moment to have that perspective to remember impermanence. What helped you remember that in that moment?
I think I practice it. I'm going to say I have a bit of a maybe dark side to myself too. I look at things through the lens of loss, that things are not going to be there. And even like when my husband leaves for work in the morning, if he doesn't say goodbye, I get very mad. I'm like, this could be our last, the last time that you are not saying or saying goodbye to me. And he's like, oh, why do you have to be so, so grim all the time? But that's how I see things. Even when even when I'm enjoying something, I know this is not going to last. I'm always reminded of that. It's in the back of my mind. I can't. It's not that something I do on purpose, but it's always there. Even if I'm at the party or a birthday party or anything, I recognize that this is for a short time. And let me just enjoy to the fullest. Or when it's a painful moment, I remind myself that as well. And it's very helpful. I don't know. That's how I see life, I guess. You are like that too?
Yeah, I'm like that too, very present to the preciousness of it all. But I don't always remember it when I'm having a big emotion or I'm in pain. Sometimes I forget about that and it feels like it's going to last forever. And it's really hard to ever think that it's going to change. And those are the hardest moments when you kind of forget and your perspective gets so narrow. But eventually, the clouds part and the sun comes out again, but it can be hard for me sometimes. And so what I try to remember as well is when I do feel really crappy, I try to remember that stinky, hard emotion is compostable, right? It's going to be rotten. It's going to be full of really uncomfortable, difficult things, but that can be fertile energy that can transform into something else.
I like how you say the impermanence of the rainbow, or how what was the R again?
Remembering to rest in the rainbow.
Remembering to rest in the rainbow. I like that you use the rainbow because it's such a good, powerful image and metaphor, right? It's just very impermanent, very short-lived.
Yeah.
And just like the all colors of the rainbow, I think we have to accept all. I'm okay with negative feelings. I think I'm a weirdo maybe, but I love sadness. I love like being in painful situations. Maybe not love, but I do enjoy those experiences too, because they're very intense and gratifying on a maybe masochistic level or something like that. Because it always, you always come out the other side, because there's always the other side. You always end up on the other side. So for me, I think when you talk about that possibility, because I have accessed the other side so many times, that fear of the discomfort is nothing.
Yeah. I love the etymology of words, and sadness is related to the root sat, or satiated, which means fullness. And so sadness is really a full, rich emotion that comes from a deep presence and attunement to the tenderness and vulnerability of humanness. And so I think that I understand that like affinity for sadness too, because there's a beauty there, and you're really touching into the truth of the human condition to feel sadness. So, and it's true that remembering the possibility of this sadness, it can help me appreciate something even more deeply once I'm through it.
And what are the other uncomfortable feelings? I mean, I know we talk about that, but which emotions do you find uncomfortable?
Anxiety is a really uncomfortable one for me, because there feels like a lack of control, and that feels really scary.
Yeah.
And anger or frustration, like being inhibited and blocked, and like something didn't go the way I wanted to, and like there's been an injustice or something. Anger is really uncomfortable because it feels like something happened and it shouldn't have, and I can't stand that feeling. What about for you?
For the anxiety, I mean, I can say so much about the anxiety. I obviously I can relate with the anxiety. However, I interviewed Ellen Vora, the author of The Anatomy of Anxiety, and she talks about false and true anxiety. And I find her work, she's a holistic psychiatrist, and it completely changed how I view anxiety, and it resonates deeply with me, her work. And I think most of my anxiety was false anxiety, what she calls false anxiety, which is really sleep, microbiome, inflammation, food related, and all that kind of stuff. But the true anxiety is when we experience like grief and loss and, life's big events that has value, that you need to be with that anxiety. I think for the most part of my life, I did suffer with this false anxiety. And now I'm okay with the true anxiety, just like I'm okay with anger and sadness. My main problem was the false anxiety, but now that is under control, I'm okay with that too. For anger, it's definitely a big emotion, and it can feel very powerful, and there's a lot of energy. But for anger, I find that I need to do movement. I immediately now, I trained myself to just not address the thing that makes me angry, or the person, or anything, whatever the trigger was. Just take myself outside and go for an angry walk. And I know that after some time, when I come back, I'm a different person. So for anger, movement is good for me. For sadness, I really love listening to sad music and just really embracing the sadness. For frustration and stuff like that, I love talking to someone. I need to share with someone who can listen and vent and say, yeah, you're right, and confirm what I'm going through. So I sort of learned to process each emotion in a way that is more productive for me at this age. I wasn't always like this, but I think I'm in a good place now. I'm okay with all of the feelings.
That's so powerful. And I love that you've gotten to know yourself enough to discern what action is the most supportive based on the emotion you're feeling. And that's self-compassion in action, is to get to know yourself well enough to discern what you need for each flavor of life. Because it's not a one size fits all kind of, oh, just do this.
Definitely not. Yeah, definitely. What have you found helpful for yourself? Are you exploring it? Have you found things that are helpful for you for different emotions?
Yeah, it's a constant exploration, but I know with anxiety, just really regulating my nervous system through deep breathing and moving my body in some gentle, soothing way. Sometimes even just like laying on the ground, just getting close to the ground and feeling that support helps me with anxiety. I like tapping. I don't know if you are.
Yeah, I do.
Tapping.
I use sometimes, not always, but I find that helpful.
Yeah, just kind of like shaking out that sensation of anxiety is helpful for me. Sadness, it helps me to connect to it and watch Grey's Anatomy or something that helps me cry and just really like sink into it, similar to you. And anger, yeah, going for a run. I gotta like burst the energy out. I'm the same way. I need to move anger. That's way too uncomfortable to just sit with for me.
Yeah.
So it helps to know what works and to have a reference point. So when we are in that stormy emotion, we can try the things that have worked for us in the past.
Yeah, there's something I teach during the pandemic. I started teaching because we were all feeling different feelings, right? I started a support group, and we're still going strong since March 2020. It's a free support group for the community members of my podcast, of the Authentic Parenting community. And in the beginning of the pandemic, I was teaching this. It just came to me, honestly. Emotional emergency plan. EEP, emotional emergency plan. And we started talking with the community members, what works for each of us, how are we coping with each feeling and emotion. And it was so amazing, a mosaic of really how people deal with their feelings. I think speaking about this gives ideas to other people so that they can figure out what works for them, right? Because it's very custom. I'm glad that we both spoke about it. But in the emotional emergency plan, that's what I would guide through this practice exercise with members, that, write down situations that are triggering, annoying, those emotional moments. Every person has their own patterns, right? Like, I know what triggers me, and when I get angry. The situations are pretty repetitious. Of course, there are situations that can come out of a blue, but we know our patterns and we know what can trigger us. So people would write a list of things that are arising emotions in them, and they would contemplate and figure out actions that they can take when they feel this X emotion. And so like I said, for me, when anger rises, I move my body immediately. When I'm frustrated, I need to call a friend. I know who I call. And so everybody figured out their own emergency plan. And it was quite interesting to see everybody's responses. Justin, for example, one of our community members, he loves coloring. Like coloring, it would drive me crazy, for example. It will not work for me. But I think if the listener can take time and explore what worked for them in the past, because we're already doing things, right? We may not know that this is what we are always doing, but just take a look at your life, like in the past week, how have you handled certain situations? What emotions have you experienced? Let's say an anger or frustration, sadness, and what has been your response? And by just analyzing a little bit, you can see your own style, your own patterns, and maybe you can figure out, this is what I'm going to do next time. And that becomes like a habit. And you don't need to think about or struggle with the emotion. You can immediately do that.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I'm so glad your community has those resources, because it really is just knowing yourself. When we try to cope in someone else's way, we're not really honoring our own process, and we have to give ourselves the space to figure things out on our own. And giving people guidance on how to do that is so valuable. I'm glad that your listeners are engaging in that too.
Yeah, I'm glad I shared this in the podcast. Thank you for giving this opportunity. And you're considering that the self-compassion practice, right?
Definitely.
Mhm. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good to know. So, what are some ways, again, people can practice self-compassion? How can they be more gentle and kind towards themselves?
Yeah, I
Are they
think
questions they can ask, or to guide them through those moments? Or I think the hardest, let me paraphrase, let me state this again. I think the hardest part is the common humanity element, remembering that you are not alone, right? I think I want you to speak about that part, how it can feel so isolating, and you can be alone in your own struggle. But how can someone remind themselves that others are struggling with this too in that moment?
Yeah, I think when we're going through a hard time, feeling a big emotion, that can be the invitation to remember our humanity, our humanness, and that there's nothing wrong with feeling something uncomfortable with whatever we're going through. It just means that we're human and we're still here. And we've overcome all the hardships up to this point. And this is a reminder that we are a part of this greater human community of people who experience these difficult emotions and go through hardships, knowing that there's unique conditions that we go through. It's not like everyone's going to have the exact same experience as us, right? There's different identities and structures in society that influence what types of difficulties people might experience. But we can trust that emotion of grief or loss or anger or frustration or sadness or anxiety is being felt and has been felt by another being somewhere. Whether we know them and are connecting to them actively in this moment doesn't have to matter. We can just trust that we're connected by that shared experience. And again, remember, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us. It just means that we're human. I think that the isolation part is, oh, I must be doing something wrong because I'm the only one who's going through this. And so it can be hard to realize how many other people are struggling. I think that can sometimes not be so comforting, but just be like, oh, I'm struggling and so many other people are struggling. This is hard. And we can remember that just as much as we're all struggling together, we can all heal and grow and learn from our hardships in community together. And that is one of the most valuable self-compassion practices, is to reach out. We don't have to practice self-compassion alone. In fact, sometimes the most self-compassionate thing is to ask for help, see a therapist, talk to a friend, even just connecting with an animal or with nature or something else that opens our perspective beyond ourselves can be a way to ease the intensity of whatever we're going through.
Very powerful. Thank you. What inspires you in general in life?
Yeah, I am so deeply inspired by nature. That's where I learned so much about growth and change and community, the way that nature works together, the way the seasons change, the way that things express their fullness and their truth and their beauty without needing to be validated for it. Yeah, or explain themselves. Like they're just fully who they are. And so just being in the presence of the elements of earth and water and fire and wind and space really inspires me. And also just being present with people, like humans are nature too, and really seeing the wholeness of humans and connecting to them and their beauty and their strength and resilience deeply inspires me. This life is such a miracle. I haven't been pregnant, but my sister, whenever I'm near a pregnant person, and my sister being one of them, I'm just like in awe of the miracle of what's happening in that process. And there's just so many miracles to our human experience that we take for granted. And so remembering the miracle as well as the mystery of it all, right? There's so much we don't know how things happen and how things work. And that mystery inspires me. And then it connects me to the magic of it all, the possibility that we have in this brief moment to love, to share, to create, to learn, to discover. It's so beautiful and so heartbreaking at the same time how we miss this all the time, and we miss each other, we miss life. And so I'm inspired by that remembrance as often as I can.
Wow, I'm very moved and touched. And you're such a brilliant young woman. You already have this deep wisdom. Now I really want to meet your mom. I want to know about her parenting and how she instilled values in you, and that this is exciting. That this reminds me of a quote that is often attributed to Einstein. It says, live as if everything is a miracle, or nothing is a miracle. Do you know that quote?
I
I don't
do.
know exactly how it is, but yeah, I think I choose the first one. I want to live as if everything is a miracle,
Me
because
too.
because it is.
Because it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest teachers of self-compassion for me that I want to make sure I mention in the context of this podcast, but just in general, was meeting my nieces. And it makes me I feel the tears are waiting for me underneath my voice right now, of the moment I met my eldest niece. And she, in her presence, just being as she was, a newborn, taught me about this inherent lovability and inherent worthiness and wholeness that exists without condition. Just she existed, she was sleeping, eating, that's all she was doing. And she was the most lovable, perfect in that sense of like divine perfection, or just complete with her wholeness. And I said to myself, like, wow, if this is in her, this is in everyone, this is in me too. And it really opened me up to give myself permission to love myself more fully because of the reflection from her. And so meeting each of my nieces, I have three incredibly radiant, loving nieces. Each one has opened my heart a little further to this love that's available in each of us. So I'm so grateful to them and to my sister, and my whole family has been a beautiful reflection of love for me. And I feel very privileged and blessed in that regard.
Wow, I'm really moved and touched, Marissa. Wonderful. I hope your sister and your mom can listen to this episode and be touched equally as I am. They will be. And you're right to remember that we were that baby once, and we're still are, right? That tiny person, that perfect human, that miracle. And this is why I have, if you can see, I'm going to show you. This is my picture when I was 5. I don't have a different picture of me. In fact, I don't have photographs of me. They got lost in the earthquake. I put this picture of myself as my youngest self on my phone as the wallpaper, I guess you call this. So every time I pick up my phone, I am reminded that I am this perfect, complete and whole human being, this innocent looking girl who looks at the life as it's a miracle. So I'm always reminded of that. And that reminds me to see other people the same way. That the child in me sees the child in you, or that miracle. And so often people say, how come you don't have a picture of your family or your daughter on your phone? I'm like, well, it's too long to explain. That this is a great reminder for me, just to be in touch with that part of myself.
And children, that reflection you're describing is full of possibility, and that's still here. My niece as a newborn, obviously, blank slate, she has so much room to grow, but we still have that capacity. We are still changing and changeable. And when we remember that inherent possibility inside of us, it is such a gift of grace that we can begin again at any moment, no matter how much we've messed up or are hurting or wish we had said something different or things had gone different. Self-compassion can be that reminder to begin again on, April 8th at 4:08 p.m. Like, it doesn't have to be some special time of the year. We can begin again in this exact moment, and that can be such a gift.
Yeah. You're so right. Oh my gosh, this is wonderful. I really enjoyed this conversation. Are there any parting words, things that you would like to say, a message, a question, or even a quote that inspires you that you want to share?
I think of my grandma Marianne, who helped me write this book, and her reminder of returning to our intentions and returning over and over again. And that quality of remembering, I think, is really at the heart of living in full presence, of living in a kind and connected way, and figuring out what helps us remember, like remember the miracle, remember the mystery, remember the magic that's possible here, remember the grace of this breath, of this day. Just keep remembering, knowing that we're definitely going to forget. We're going to get caught up. We're going to be stuck and feel stinky emotions. But just coming back to remembering over and over and over again is the best we can do. Just keep remembering, and that's enough. And make it joyful to remember. I have Post-it notes around my home and artwork and notifications, whatever we can use to help us remember, and to have people in our life that help us remember, do activities that help us remember. Every time we take a drink of water can be an act of remembrance of the miracle of life, of loving ourselves, whatever it is that we need. So I can leave with that, perhaps, but that can be enough.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. I really, truly enjoyed this conversation, this little moment in time that is now passing, how impermanent things are, right?
Yeah, it is such a gift. I feel like I could talk to you for 10 more hours about all the things. So I'm really honored to have had this time with you, Anna. It's been really special.
Thank you. I'm extending you a big virtual hug.
Me too.
And thank you so much. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. What's your biggest takeaway? Did you find it useful? Do you have a self-compassion practice? If you are a brand new or relatively new listener, you may not know that we have dedicated a few episodes to the topic of self-compassion before, and here are two of my recommendations. Episode 119, How You Can Be Kind and Loving Towards Yourself with Dr. Kristin Neff, and episode 112, How to Cultivate Self-Compassion with Marian Rose. I love hearing from you. Are you enjoying the podcast? What are some of your recent favorite episodes and topics? I welcome your feedback, comments, and questions. You can always get in touch. Send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. Call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for international listeners, there is a free tool on the contact page of my website. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and leave a message. If you haven't already, be sure to write a review on Apple Podcasts or rate the show on Spotify. Also, consider becoming a patron. Your support is invaluable. With a small monthly contribution, you can show your love for your favorite show and say thank you. To learn more, go to patreon.com/authentic parenting. You can find the show and follow it wherever podcasts are played: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and elsewhere. And connect with me on Instagram, the only social media platform that I use. Until next week, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.